Jeff Chester. So glad you're here to
Thank
join
you
us.
so much, Laura Glenn.
Center for Digital Democracy, which I am proud to be a board member and also a longtime ally and friend. Your work has gone through many iterations, starting 30, 40 years ago, maybe even more. And I think that it would be helpful for people to understand that the protection of children's sort of the Protection of Children's Television Act, and then later on, children's participation in the internet. These are sort of legal precedents that you and Kathy Montgomery, your partner, have helped to set. So let's talk just a little bit about that, and then let's fast forward into the work you're doing
Well,
now.
well, I mean, what's going on now, we're about to talk about the impact of generative AI and how the most powerful media companies and global companies and brands are using it is very relevant to quickly refer to the past work that I and you and many others have done because we are at a transition moment here where not all of the technology is in place. It's certainly evolving very, very quickly. Certainly the policies, or whether there'll even be a public policy to govern how our media system evolves and how companies should be regulated as they use these very powerful tools hasn't yet been defined. There's a battle and struggle over that, and that'll be going on. So, these moments of media transition, as we call it, are moments of critical opportunity to try to intervene. And my career starts back, in part, I mean, going back to this is where everybody, their eyes roll because they realize they're talking to their great grandfather. Really in the 1970s, when I became interested in media and journalism. But to kind of flash forward, by the early 1980s, there was another critical transition moment because then President Reagan came in, and very much like the current administration and the current FCC chairman, Carr, the FCC chairman under Reagan, famously said, "We don't really need to regulate television. Television is just another appliance. It's a toaster with pictures." If you may recall. And as they began to deregulate the media, as they began to get rid of rules regarding responsibilities of broadcast stations and television networks, I and several others decided to and threatened the documentary because the news and documentary units of all the at that time three television networks went under a transition. They lost staff and support. We wanted to intervene in the regulatory process to support independent filmmakers. And out of that experience, both starting in California with legislation and then ultimately federal legislation in 1988, led to the creation of the Independent Television Service, the ITVS, which up until now, because now that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has been defunded, and that was the fiscal agent. But up until now, 6 million a year, it's not that much, but it's something, have gone into supporting independent producers. So the first intervention was, how do we support independent perspectives of dissent in the news and information sphere, documentaries that are critical, I always thought, to any kind of a media system in a democracy. But knowing that the system was going to undergo transition, the media system was going to undergo transition because of digital. By the early 1990s, because this has been talked about for years, my wife and I, she had been a professor at UCLA of television. That's how I met her. So we created an organization in Washington, then called the Center for Media Education, which became my current NGO, the Center for Digital Democracy, to try to get regulatory policies through that would kind of lead to a kind of understanding and a precedent to regulate the new media, to regulate what was going to become the online media. And and we did a few things then. I mean, among our work included reports and organizing that helped lead to what was called the E-rate, which is funded schools and libraries to have access to the internet because we believed you cannot have a democratic society where some people cannot afford access to the current means of communication. We fought for cross ownership safeguards to prevent the growing consolidation of power across newspapers and broadcast television stations and radio stations, and held them off as best as we could. We did, as you said, saw that the internet threatened privacy and autonomy and was a highly manipulative a system. And although we try to get privacy policies for all Americans, we're only able to protect children under 12. That's the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is still the only online privacy law, commercial privacy law the U.S. has. And then we got through rules for broadcast television that required them to air educational and informational programming for children, the so-called Children's Television Act, setting a kind of precedent that there needed to be regulatory, statutory requirements for the media companies. I mean, and then in the early part of the 21st century, we really, along with one other organization, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, were the only groups opposing the Google's plans to dominate online. It was called the Google DoubleClick merger, and it's taken what 25 years for the regulators and the antitrust groups and frankly the advocates to catch up to say, hey, we should never have allowed these guys to grow so big unconstrained. But the core critique we had all along, which is relevant today, is that the DNA of U.S. media and most global media is advertising and marketing. And because it works online, it's about massive data collection and use. So we knew that the internet was going to be a highly commercialized medium. And that all the potential that people talked about all the potential that people hoped for the internet then called the World Wide Web, where they were saying, well, this is going to be different than television. This is going to be different than cable. It's going to fulfill its democratic aspirations. We knew that was unlikely to happen because advertising has undermined every U.S. medium, and your work and the work of your colleagues, in Vermont and around the country in terms of public access is it, and I was involved in that as well, helping but don't blame me for where it ended up. Um, we needed to have public policies. So now where are we? That's like a long soundbite, which shows you how old I am. We are now seeing the convergence of several powerful forces that I really haven't fully articulated, well yet. I can see, but look, you have the dominant media companies in control of the majority of the online experience, and it's all really designed around promoting engagement to get you to stay on and ultimately buy and like the products and the advertisements that make the revenue streams for Meta, for Google, for Amazon and TikTok. So the dominant digital media players are advertising dependent operations, incredibly successful, now have expanded worldwide and are expanding more. I mean, even as we speak through partnerships, and a new form of digital colonialism has emerged around the world, where these big U.S. companies are either occupying dominant places in all these different countries in Africa and Latin America and Asia Pacific, or they are partnering with the local powerful entity, to kind of carve up the marketplace. So you have the existing dominant media system of the online platforms, now infused with incredibly powerful technologies known generally as generative AI. And you have also a growing alliance between the companies that help make the chips and the applications for generative AI, NVIDIA, Open AI, etc. In essence, wanting to be digital marketing companies and rival Google and Amazon, but also, and more likely, partnering with them. So this week, for example, OpenAI and Amazon developed a partnership. And of course, so you have that. And so what you're seeing now is this just explosion of much more powerful intrusive, manipulative, capabilities made possible by Gen AI. And it's truly kind of remarkable. And if you're a kind of video maker, an independent, a programmer or an artist, there's a lot of great tools out there now to make this content. But these technologies are being used by not only the platforms, Meta and Google and OpenAI, but the leading corporations all over the world. So, for example, in terms of the work we're currently doing, we're looking at the ways that the tobacco companies and the alcohol companies and the food and beverage companies and the retailers are using data and digital marketing and now Gen AI, and they're more or less doing the same. They're able to harness these tools to push their products, to push their values, into people's lives, into the community in ways they've been doing, but now they're able to penetrate much more effectively. And imagine these tools, which they are in the hands of political groups like MAGA and other authoritarian sources. So we're kind of at a tipping point that if we don't come in and look at what's kind of going on under the hood here and say, my God, Meta and Google, so much power already, even more power for what end? Let alone, putting in context how they've acquiesced to the Trump administration just so they can and be deregulated, so they can gather more of our data and expand into more markets and not have any safeguards for Gen AI. That's the trade-off they've made with the devil of the Trump administration. So these commercial forces, these commercial media forces, are getting much stronger. So far, the organizing against them, given all the work that has to happen to fight what Trump is doing on multiple fronts, but the work against them on the media front is not as organized and as coherent as it should be. That said, we have an opportunity during this transition period, working with allies around the world, to see if we can intervene, develop a more sane vision for digital media and Gen AI, propose safeguards, expose the bad stuff, and think about what an alternative system could look like, how it could be structured and funded that offers people something different from what we get now and what we're likely to get in the future.
So, what gives you hope that it's possible this time?
I don't know if it's possible. This first place, it's not going to be necessarily on my watch. I mean, to be honest with you, I just read today in the New York Times that the average viewer of MSNBC, MSN Now, is 72. The median age is 72. So I don't know if I'm 78, I'll be 78. So I don't know if I'll be around for this, to be honest with you. Um, I mean, I think that, I don't know. I think there are people, look, I do think we're at a moment of a potential democratic change. That what Trump has done and what MAGA has done is a wake-up call for a lot of people. There's been very good organizing going on, no kings and indivisible. There's some hopeful signs in the electorate in today's, so we'll have to see. And that I hope that on the agenda of the reformers for democratic renewal includes media and that I know that's a concern for people around the world, certainly in the European Union. They've been going after Google and others, although the Trump administration is restraining them from regulating in the ways they could. So I think more people are aware of it, more people are critical of the system, and I hope something will come out of it. We'll certainly do our part as long as we're around to kind of sound the alarm, and that's really been our role. Bill Moyers, the late Bill Moyers, who was a supporter of ours, said we were kind of the Paul Revere, of the digital media age, and that's what we've ended up doing. But there are people like you and people who work at your center and others who do care about it. So we'll have to see. But I don't know. I mean, the amount of greed that these companies, reveal, Salesforce saying, hey, Trump, send the National Guard to San Francisco, even though I live there, because they want to be able to sell, more, AI marketing software and what Google and the others have done, and Comcast, supporting the ballroom is outrageous. I guess we shouldn't expect anything more, but we must come up with an alternative vision, and we should be fighting them. And there's lots of good reasons to fight them, and so we'll have to see. But we also face that, frankly, there's been the foundations are partly responsible for the situation we're in generally in our democracy, right? I mean, Ford and others back 15 years ago when I said we needed to regulate Google, they said, "Oh, Google's our friend,"
Right? They were funding
right?
them.
So there's really been very little money for organizing. No one has appreciated the role that advertising and marketing and data collection play in the shaping of our media system and its impact on programming and content and individuals. So there's been no money to go after the advertising. We've been able to kind of do it, by sure we'll do this project, and then see, I'm retiring soon, so I can say that sure we'll take the money for this project, but I'm actually going to do this because I think it's more important, right? That was been my business model. I'm probably indicted now. And yeah, so there's been no money and no kind of real appreciation of it. So I don't know, but we're going to continue to write reports and expose it and sound the alarm. But this is also, as I said, a very difficult time because there's so much going on. We don't know whether we'll have an election, a real fair election in 2026 and all that. But if we don't fix how our system communicates to the public and ensure that it helps sustain a democratic culture, not a kind of one-dimensional one, a diverse one. People have different points of view, but there are certain common elements that bind us together as a country. At least it should. And there have been experiments in the past, in the 1930s, and Jill Lepore and others have written about all that. We really need to look back at what was done back then to kind of reinvigorate democracy during the Depression and the threats of fascism, and think what we can do again now in this part of the 21st century.
So I think it would be helpful for people to understand from a media literacy standpoint what we're up against. So we're speaking, I think in broad structural terms about how the trajectory of technology, it doesn't follow democratic principles, it follows principles of capital. I mean, that's always been the case, but it doesn't mean we don't stop fighting. In order to fight and be successful, we need an educated population. And I think your current writing about the domination of the food industry in terms of their marketing and use of data, emotion, and marketing savvy to manipulate how people purchase food, just as one example, would be useful for people to understand because, even my husband is surprised when hears about how these tools, including generative AI, are used to manipulate what we do, what we think, what we purchase, who we make friends with. And there are a couple of things in the paper that you wrote recently that were really troubling phrases. The integration of varied information and data systems into a single coherent, quote, source of truth. So it's sort of
That's
conceptual.
what the industry calls it.
Exactly.
Right.
And then sort of combining that with this emotional capture to promote desire at scale.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. I think you've identified some of the kind of key language phrases that the industry uses to describe the apparatus that they have invested in and created and their goals for it. And our work has always really been about exposing the kind of trajectory of contemporary digital technologies as to send a warning that these tools will be used by governments and others that want to repress us. And that's, of course, what Trump and his allies are doing. They're able to tap into all this technology that was developed for commercial purposes, or some were developed for defense and other purposes. I mean, here's a good example. The we can talk about food and beverage companies, but think about Walmart, think about your health system. They all do this. They all are engaged in kind of research and development. They do focus groups. What do people think about X? What do people think about Y? In order to kind of come up with and hone a message that will work for them to persuade people in the marketplace. And they've always used unconscious tools and all that. In the last 15 years, they've used something called neuromarketing, where people are hooked up to MRIs and other kinds of technologies that scan their eye movements and examine their facial movements to understand how these messages and visual images affect people's unconscious and emotional states. But now through generative AI, they have developed a whole new rich source of testing and measuring and honing, their messages to get the desired reaction. And they call that synthetic data. They're able to use generative AI technologies to create a wide variety of what they call personas, who represent micro segments among our population. So before they were able to, identify various demographic groups and various income levels and different regions, and come up, let's say, with a dozen or 2 dozen different characteristics that they wish to kind of develop a message and target. Now they can come up with thousands of differentiated approaches that really have, like an X-ray, understand how we react and to various messages because they believe, and although there are questions, but they believe this synthetic, what they call synthetic data, these personas do reflect the real attitudes of people. And because generative AI enables the production of content, including video content, to be developed, very efficiently and with robust speed and deployment, they can take all that data and make multiple messages. And because the digital media system is one that has tracked us all as individuals for now decades. That's why the industry's not wanted any privacy policies, and why children in the United States have been one of the few groups that don't bear the brunt of it all for various reasons. But now they're able to take that highly honed message and deliver it, whether we're in front of the TV or on the PC or on social media or on gaming platforms or using our mobile phone. And based on our reactions, they can then go back to those same efforts, refine and keep and send out new, what they think are more effective messages or follow-up messages. So the research side has changed. Keeping on the theme of these virtual personas, they've somehow been able to get many people to want to be influencers. The industry doesn't call them influencers anymore. They're now creators. And many people see the way that they're going to earn a living as being a creator. And the digital marketing industry has taken over the influencer business. It's a highly structured and organized industry. It's not just somebody out in the wild sending you a message. They're being prompted, paid, etc. But now, because of Gen AI, they are creating all these virtual influencers. And those virtual influencers, are also honed to kind of be more reflective of various demographics and lifestyles and attitudes and cultures. One of the things generative AI video production does is that you can simultaneously change the language of your video in dozens of languages, literally in seconds, and then deploy them in markets all around the world. And one of the things you're now seeing is a more centralized approach to advertising and marketing from the food and beverage companies, so that they're creating, basically they're creating one master campaign and then are able to deploy it in hundreds of markets and dozens of countries simultaneously. They're able now to kind of measure our reactions as well. Now when you think about Gen AI, you also have to think about how Amazon and Google and Meta and TikTok have transformed their already powerful dominant operations to be Gen AI first companies with data, marketing, advertising, et cetera. If you read the most recent third quarter reports of these companies, you will see that Gen AI and uses of data at the top of what they're doing. Huge, massive investment, and that's it. There's a huge, massive investment by the platforms and the Gen AI industry to make all these technologies as effective as possible. And everybody knows about all the data centers that are being built in the United States and worldwide, and we should be allying with the environmental groups and human rights organizations around the world are concerned about data centers because it's displacing peoples and communities and threatening the water supply in places like Mexico, et cetera. I believe, yeah, you could say there's a bubble and all that. I don't think it's a bubble because Google and Meta are in a bubble, and now they're Gen I first companies, but all that massive investment and all that power, both energy power and marketplace power and ultimately political power, is going to have an impact on our lives, and it's not going to be good. Given where these companies are at, they're not about democracy, they're not about freedom, they're not about creativity or autonomy. They're about control and power and making alliances with whoever is in charge, at whatever price. So this is just the kind of tip of the iceberg of what the I mean, look, there's a lot of good reasons to use these tools. If you want to look, if your viewers want to find out what's going on with generative AI and advertising and marketing. And if they have one of the programs like Perplexity or OpenAI, they can ask, and it's amazing. It'll tell you right there. Oh, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing that, we're doing that, we're doing that. I did ask Perplexity about the privacy policy of its parent company, and the machine responded, "Well, that's not my business. I don't know. That's a corporate decision. I'm just doing my thing." But so I think there's always a crisis going on, and this is one that requires us to pay attention and try to figure out what we can do about it.
Well, it seems so pervasive. I mean, we're in the matrix.
Yes, it's true.
And there was that article in the Times, which I haven't read yet, about living without AI. Did
Yeah.
you see that? And how
No. I did see
incredibly,
that. I did see the photo today of a story.
yeah.
I didn't read about the AI necklace that people apparently are in love with or hate.
Yeah. So, it's just as if it reminds me of the Max Headroom episodes with the blanks who were outside. They were on the outside of the digital matrix and they
Yeah.
were in like trailers at the outside of town and they had no identification numbers and they were kind of seen as the barbarians at the gates. And I feel like we're going to be creating this kind of separation in the society between the people who have to work really hard to be disconnected. I mean, it's not just a matter of not having a smartphone. It's almost impossible.
I don't think you can be. I don't think you can be disconnected. People often say, "What can you do?" I mean, just like I don't think media. I mean, I think media literacy helps, but it doesn't fix the problem. If you and I always say, well, you can't disconnect. I mean, do you want to find out you're driving? Do you want to find out and your kid's sick? Do you want to find out where the nearest gas station, drugstore? You're going to use the mobile phone. Do you know you've now opted in for a kind of pervasive tracking and all that? Or do you want the discount coupons at the grocery store, which of course people do, and that's part of a huge data system because the grocery stores, the supermarkets, the convenience stores have become like Google's today. It's called retail media. They're tracking you in the store, offline, and working with the big platforms too. And they're using Gen AI to track you when you come into the store, to see where you go, what products you like, and then to figure out how to market to you. And they're even now selling real-time digital ads to people as they enter the store because they've identified them as individuals that can be influenced, during their time of shopping. So I don't think you can escape this. I think this is that the system they've invested in and building, it is our reality, but we have to change the terms of what that reality looks like. okay, you built this technology, but we should be using it to unleash all this kind of creativity, all this kind of diversity, all these new forms of media and content ownership for people who have not been part of the system or people who should be better represented in the system. We should be using this, to promote news and public affairs, and really help educate the American people about the issues that's going on. It's kind of like that vision for cable, that and for media that many of us had in the late 60s, and early 70s. And that opportunity is here again. With these technologies, it's much more powerful than a porta pack. It's much more important than it, but the challenge is still the same in some ways. I think, Lauren Glenn, about what we do with all these new technologies, and do we kind of just allow it to be controlled by the people who really don't really care about us, just want to make money off of us, or control us? Or do we try to turn it over to the public? And what does that look like? What does a democratic media system look like in the Gen AI digital media era? And that's something we're thinking about. And I know you are and your colleagues are, and we need to have a national debate about this. We really need to have a kind of town meeting, a national town meeting, about what we do with these technologies. We need to challenge the status quo and the narrative here.
And do we use the tools to do it?
We should. We should. We should. Yeah. These are what democratic personas look like versus the
Yeah.
undemocratic personas.
I just keep thinking of keep hope alive. That we have to continue to remind ourselves that this is the conversation that needs to happen so that we don't forget and that we can keep working towards it because you've got people like Lena Khan who were running the FTC who was, that was a great boon during that time when she and her leadership was there in the Federal Trade Commission. And now, of course, she's not at the Federal Trade Commission. She's still working, doing things,
She's a
keeping
professor at
alive.
Columbia.
Yeah. Um, but we need to make sure that all of us who are working in these areas continue to articulate the need, even though it seems incredibly difficult and an uphill battle.
No, I agree, but I think, but we shouldn't necessarily count on only that if we're lucky to have a Democratic administration in 20 is 2028, that that good people like Lena will solve all the problems, because in fact, although Lena was a friend, put it on the right track, um, they needed help. They really weren't able, they didn't have the time and the resources, and there wasn't a constituency demanding the kind of media reforms that we need. Same with the Federal Communications Commission, which under, frankly, Obama, under Biden, was a waste,
Right.
right? So we need to develop, like a kind of an indivisible movement for
Yeah.
media reform. I mean, even though there have been groups, like the Free Press and others, and ours, my own or NGO for that matter, that's tried. They've been very unsuccessful. They've not been looking at kind of the current directions as well as I think we should be looking at. And we need a movement to pressure the policy. If we get good policymakers, and we need to have states like Vermont take the lead, and we need to do everything we can. And there should be global alliances as well. Um, so there's a lot to do.
So I sent you that, I think, People versus Big Tech, which is a series of talks that one of the representatives in the legislature is leading around the state to get people to talk about these issues.
That's good.
And, they're not massively attended, but they're attended and it's a start. And she's trying to build essentially a constituency to help put pressure in the legislature when these bills, these pro-consumer bills are brought forward because there's so much pressure that comes from the industry. So she basically was told, you need to mobilize some people so that we've got some cover so we can get these things passed.
Well,
And I think
yeah.
that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think what needs to happen, and once again, it's a question of capacity. So I believe always in exposing what the companies are doing. So if we just take Vermont, I mean, yeah, they can claim they're helping small business, and they have a legitimate claim in part, the Googles and the Metas and all that, and they're always able to find examples. But if we can talk about how they extract all the data, if we
Yeah,
can show how they favor their biggest advertisers, or out of state companies, if we can show more about what they really do to people, which you can, pushing pharmaceuticals, pushing junk food. I mean, Google and Meta and TikTok, they're all pushing unhealthy foods that lead to the kids getting overweight, that could raise your healthcare costs, et cetera, et cetera. We need to do a better job exposing what these guys are doing.
yeah,
They don't have a good story to tell, frankly, but they've been able to get away with stuff because there's a lot on our agenda, and not everybody is looking under the hood.
right.
And I've always said the industry writes our own material. Each of these platforms have sections that designed for advertisers that really convey what they're really doing. Google has Think with Google. There's TikTok for business. There's Meta for business. Your viewers and listeners should go on those sites and look and see, all these case studies that kind of illustrate how these platforms act irresponsibly and use their power to promote a special interest versus the public interest.
Jeff, thank you so much for
Thank you,
keeping
Lauren Glenn,
focused.
and thank you
Um,
and your colleagues in the
we're
chat.
not going to have the like you're retired now. What do you think looking back conversation right
Oh
now?
yeah, I'm telling you, it
You're
was
still
terrible, and
working.
you won't believe how bad it was.
You're still working. And
All
thank
right,
goodness for that.
bye bye.